Welcome to the eLABorate Topics podcast, where we focus on lab-specific strategies for medical laboratory professionals. We're proud to be the healthcare detectives that work behind the scenes to get the results needed to influence medical decisions. Let's grow together and jump right into the lab.
Welcome back to another episode of eLABorate Topics podcast. We are your hosts for today's show, Tywauna Wilson, Lona Small, and myself, Stephanie Whitehead. And we're so excited to be bringing you another episode of this podcast where today we're going to be talking about work-life balance. For those of you tuning in for the first time, our podcast is a weekly podcast where myself and my co-hosts bring you topics related to the laboratory and leadership that helps you excel inside and outside of the laboratory. So today, as we're talking about work-life balance, we know that over the past year and a half, it's been very difficult in terms of everything changing in our personal lives due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And as we get to a place where, this is pretty much our new normal, some people are working from home, some people have spouses who are working from home while they continue to go to work. Laboratories are looking at redesigning how they do their business and the business that we're doing every single day, the tests that we're performing. Sometimes it can get very stressful, and your work can become all-consuming. You don't have enough time for yourself, which creates more stress on yourself. So we want to give you some tips and tactics today on identifying when your work life and your personal life may be imbalanced, and some symptoms of that, and some tips on creating more balance in your life. Life is a journey. It's a stride. It's not a sprint. We want to be able to have long-lasting careers and happy personal lives. So we're hopeful that this podcast will help someone out there who is struggling in this area today. So first we're going to start out with Tywauna, and she's going to talk about issues that may be causing imbalance or things that occur in our work life that cause imbalance in our work and personal life.
Thanks, Stephanie. That was a good introduction, and very excited to talk about this topic. Over the past year, since we have been in a pandemic and undergoing different changes in our workplaces, it has been a balancing act. It's been a struggle, I know, for myself, and talking with my colleagues who have young children at home. It has been a bit of a balancing act at times, and leading to some burnt out and frustration, as well as some of those issues of not being connected. So when we talk about work-life balance, let's just take a step back and then talk about exactly what it is, and really, can you achieve work-life balance? So the quick and short of it, as I was doing some research of trying to find a good definition of what they consider work-life balance to be, and it's a state of equilibrium where a person equally prioritizes the demands of your career and the demands of one's personal life. Now, I'm not sure if these things can truly be in balance. I mean, I think it depends on how you look at it, a career versus personal life and family. I'm not sure that those rate the same to achieve what is known as true balance. But more so, I know from my perspective, I look at it more so of work-life management, of managing those things. And so some of the things or common reasons that employees state that lead to this kind of a tussle, if you will, or poor work-life balance includes increased responsibilities at work. And I know for us in the laboratory, even though it has been a pandemic and with COVID-19, the responsibilities at work did not decrease for a lot of the laboratorians. I know in my laboratory, we still had major projects that we had occurring and still had tight timelines, especially with undergoing a new computer system implementation that we have that will be going live very soon. And that required a lot of resources, a lot of dedication, a lot of focus. And so those increased responsibilities, I know with our IT team, our partners are now working at home and the kids are at home. And so not uncommon to see kids in the background of a Teams meeting, or you hear them in the background. But it does create a little bit of tension there for the employee, and that struggle of that balance of being a great worker along with being a great parent as well. So having that increased responsibilities at work. I know for our laboratorians out there that's listening, some of you might be inside of your CAP inspection windows, and as we know, that process looks different, creating a little bit of tension because now you will be reviewing whoever you're inspecting virtually, which might require more time on your part because you're doing this within your workday. So trying to maintain all of those responsibilities, new instrumentation. I know our labs across the listeners have new instrumentation that they are implementing. So just those responsibilities at work can be a hassle of trying to keep it all together and keep the projects on task. Working longer hours. Again, with the increased responsibility, working longer hours have been necessary, especially if you're in those areas that might be performing the COVID testing. I know those labs had to ramp up at a rapid speed with staffing, with instrumentation, with vendors, and making sure they have the right supplies. And so working longer hours is necessary in order to help the whole combat this pandemic with COVID-19. So that could be stressful as well, especially if you know that you have 8 hours or 10 hours or whatever the case may be to be able to get your work done, and now it's carrying over into your home and personal life. The increased responsibilities at home create a bit of an imbalance as well. A lot of our schools are still on virtual, meaning that these young children are at home. Our teenagers are at home. And so now transitioning from not just having a career, you're being a parent and a teacher at the same time of making sure that your kids are on track with their studies. So that's an increased responsibility that you didn't have before, the increased pressure. And so that generates some additional unbalance. Having kids, of course, I mean, it can be tricky. It's a wonderful thing for those of us that are blessed to be parents, but again, it creates a bit of a balancing act, especially if your children are busy in sports or extracurricular activities. All of those things have an effect on us. And when we are out of balance, we have to think about it, is that now we have increased stress, and we also have a higher rate of burnout because we're trying to juggle all of these things and keep them in order, and now we have more stress of trying to do that. We have more stress of trying to keep things in order and keep everybody happy. And so those are some things that make it just a little bit difficult in today's workplace. There are some ways that we can achieve a better way of balance. And one of those ways that we can first accept that there is no perfect work-life balance. We can do many things, but there is no perfect way of achieving those things. And then there's also finding, a job and a career that allows you to be at your best for both your team and for your children, your family, and those things that make it so that it's better for you. So, Lona, Stephanie, when you think about some opportunities that come up in that balance or things that have come up with your teams as far as that being out of balance, what do you all think of?
Yeah, so for me, you actually brought up a really great point when you're trying to juggle so many things at the same time and not able to kind of segment different projects. You end up with this kind of mental overload. So many things happening at the same time in your head and so many kind of loose ends or unfinished projects because you're at home trying to juggle stuff at home and at the same time trying to juggle work, or even at work when there's like a lot of projects going on, like you mentioned, you may have Epic or you may have instrumentation projects or initiatives. Like right now at my job, very relevant because we have a whole new line that we're putting out. We're changing over to Beaker at the same time, and then there's all this challenge with COVID and, you know, the stress, especially for our pre-analytical staff that go up to do phlebotomy. And so there's just all this stuff going on in our head that can actually cause this overload of information that you're processing at the same time that cause it can be more emotional and mental. A lot of time it's physical, but I think in this case when there's just so much going on at home and at work, the burnout many times become more emotional and mental. So in that case, you see different signs, and I see this in my organization where people who used to produce at a high level, you notice that they're really not producing at the level that they are used to. After a while, you know, it's like you're like wondering what's happening, you know, and I can use myself as an example. Recently, I started asking myself, what's going on? You know, the excitement that you probably would have for a certain project, it becomes almost monotonous because you really need to take that break mentally. So if you're trying to juggle everything at the same time, your mind cannot process so much, and so it's almost like a shutdown. And so that can show with your behavior. It can show physically where you probably could get sick. And of course, it becomes more of a challenge because there's so much work to do. There's all this stuff going on at home. And then when people start getting sick and calling out, then that creates more stress for the ones that are at work. And then it becomes a cycle where they're getting sick. So, you know, they could get sick physically, but they could get sick mentally and emotionally, where people just don't have the interest that they would normally have. And so it's hard to even get up out of bed. You know, people probably end up with headaches. And, you know, sometimes, like, even for me, experiences that I've seen where there's, like, people just explode verbally. Like, what's going on? Somebody just explode on someone. And this was happening, like, when the second phase of the COVID was happening. We noticed that there are people that would normally have some control emotionally were losing control. And, you know, we decided, okay, let's meet with them and see what is it that we could do. But what I realized is that it's not a cookie cutter. So when we sit down, you know, for different people, you know, different things would be helpful. Some people, mindfulness. Some people, they just need a break. But basically, you know, you're going to see a lot of emotional or different behavior in your staff that probably could be a red flag. Or for you as an individual, if you find that you're either losing interest in things that you're usually excited about, that's a red flag. And hopefully, you know, in this podcast, we could probably talk of different things that you could do to help with, you know, when you identify symptoms like you're losing interest or you find that you're not feeling well. You may have back pains or migraines or, you know, just sometimes it can cause just other illnesses. So be in tune with your feelings, be in tune with, you know, what's going on with yourself, and just start checking in and say, am I really stressed? Because a lot of times we think we're not stressed, because we think we're coping, so we're pushing things behind, and it comes out in different ways. So when you start having that lack of interest, you're feeling like you don't want to get up out of bed, or you find you're losing your fuse with people, or things start irritating you, just, step back and, reassess yourself and, ask yourself, am I overloaded? Is there a lot of stuff going on either mentally or physically that I'm trying to juggle that's kind of out of whack? So that's kind of what I would say in terms of, some of the signs that we could look for within ourselves and with our coworker.
You make a good point, Lona, in that, some of the signs that you mentioned about the headaches and migraines. I know for myself, I've gotten tons of headaches. It probably not eating like I should or eating enough, not drinking enough water. And I'm sure that my colleagues, because I've been in meetings and people have not seemed as interested in some of these projects by some of the questions that they ask. These could be things that we've talked about before and discussed these things at length, and they still seem to be out of tune with it. So, this could be that could be an example. I'm happy you pointed that out, that they could be out of balance, or maybe they could be a little bit burnt out just by not being as interested in the project or as in tune with it as they were before. So thank you for saying that, because that, could be something that's easily missed, especially with the various projects that our laboratorians are working on each and every day.
Definitely.
I agree. I mean, I've been in a couple of different meetings, like you said, where, people may be on mute too long because they're not really engaged in the meeting. And I know that it's a lot more difficult now that many of our conversations and meetings and gatherings have to happen through virtual platforms. But, we kind of have a running joke in our little office where we don't go a day without saying, hey, you're still on mute. Are you talking? We're on mute. I think we can't hear you. And, even for myself, I've noticed that there were assignments or things that I do on a regular basis that I used to have, pretty stable timelines for myself. But, every once in a while I'll say, I can get to that tomorrow, or I might have to be late tomorrow, So if you start to see changes in, like Lona said, your work productivity, that might be a sign that you need to check in with yourself and understand where you are in that work-life balance. And there are some tips. I have some tips for our listeners on if you feel like there may be imbalance in your work-life priorities and your work-life management, some tips that you can do to help get back on track. Just like Tywauna said, equally balancing your personal life and your career is really tough, especially if your work environment has changed. I know for my spouse, he is now working from home, and he has been for about a year now. And in the beginning, he was really excited, but I think he got to a point where, even for me, it was very difficult to define the lines between work and personal life. When you're working from home, when you're in the house all the time, it's very hard to understand, how do I detach from work? My work computer is always up. There's always dishes in the sink a couple of feet from me, and so how do I separate the two? And then also for people like me and some of our listeners who never stopped going to work, even when people were sheltering in place, we continued to go into the hospital, into the clinic, into the laboratories. It could be difficult to maintain a good grip on the new changes of the world as you continue to work. So as I'm continuing to go to work every day, but I'm trying to also get a grip on the management of the changes in my personal life. And those things can be difficult, especially if you don't take the time to process and compartmentalize and understand where you are. So here's just a couple of tips. Be sure to leave a comment if you have additional tips that we don't mention, or if you found additional things that I don't mention that have worked for you, because we're all learning here and we're all here to support each other. So the first tip is to let go of perfection. And this is something that we recently talked about at a presentation for an ASCLS conference that the eLABorate topics ladies just did about overcoming perfectionism. But as your career grows and you get to new heights in your career and you get more responsibility at work, and as your personal life grows, like Tywauna and Lona said, maybe you have children, and maybe you just bought a new house, or there are other things in your personal life, the goal of perfection, either in your work life or your personal life, becomes harder to maintain. And it's pretty impossible to be perfect in all areas of your life. And so, what I've written down for our listeners is the more realistic option is to strive for excellence. Just strive to do your best in everything that you do. So, like I mentioned, sometimes a Zoom has technical issues, or sometimes you worked really hard for a presentation and all of the members can't be present and the meeting has to be rescheduled. But you strive for excellence in the things that you can control and focus only on the things that you can do. The next tip is setting limits. If you don't set limits, work can leave you with no time for your relationships or the activities that you love to do outside of work. So try to manage your time as best as you can. Give yourself enough time to get things done. Schedule your breaks where you can if you're a manager or a supervisor and you're working off an Outlook calendar or some sort of software calendar. Even try to go in and schedule your breaks. This is something that I've had to be cognizant of, but don't overschedule yourself. So, if you look at your calendar and you've got things lined up back to back, and then the minute one thing runs over, the whole rest of your schedule is thrown off, or you don't have time to prepare for the next thing. So look at your schedule. Try to schedule in breaks. Try not to overbook yourself, double book yourself. There's a senior leader at our organization that triple books his day, and then he goes in and picks the meetings that he wants to go to. And you have to do what works for you. But if you're finding that you're becoming too stressed or too overburdened, then you might need to take a look of what's stealing your day. Learn to say no, and that's the third tip. And that's something that I think, myself and many people who have a personality of, people-pleasing have had to try to learn and become better at as you've grown older and wiser. But evaluate the priorities at your work and at home and try to shorten your to-do list. This can mean cutting out or delegating some of the activities that you don't enjoy or sharing your concerns with your employees or others. So if you're at home and you don't enjoy grocery shopping or, putting together the grocery list for the curbside pickup, see if somebody else in your household can take that task. And that way you can focus on other things. In addition, at work, if there is a task that can be delegated to someone, who is also competent to do that task and you have the authority to delegate, consider delegating and just having an oversight role for that task. That leaves you open to do other tasks that you do enjoy and do them well. When you quit accepting tasks out of guilt or out of a false sense of obligation, then you have time, like I said, for the activities that are more meaningful for you. Also, look at how you're spending your time in the day. And this is sometimes when I'm mentoring people and they always say, there's not enough hours in the day. This is something that I ask them to look at because many people waste your time with activities that add no value. Sometimes you spend too much time at work or with a colleague venting or gossiping or having meaningless conversations. So take stock of the activities that are not enhancing your career or not enhancing your personal life and try to minimize those times and give yourself time back into your schedule. The fourth tip would be to detach from work if you can. This can be difficult if, like I mentioned before, if you're working from home. So if you are working from home, try to dress for work. And I know that can be difficult because I've worked from home a couple of times, and it is difficult to, actually, keep that same business casual routine. But try to get dressed for work and have a quiet, dedicated workspace if possible. That helps you keep that separation between work life and personal life. Seek guidance from your manager on what is the expectation on when you can disconnect. And this is something, like I said before, I've had to do because of my role. Many people have my personal cell phone number. I have my email on my personal cell phone. So even when I leave work, I guess, quote unquote, clock out for the day, it's still difficult to detach because you're still receiving text messages, you're still receiving phone calls, you're still going through and checking your email. So when does it stop, if you don't set those limitations? There's been times where I've made, jokes that, I don't take days off. There is no such thing as PTO because even when you're on PTO, you're checking your email and you're taking phone calls, or you're accepting text messages, et cetera, et cetera. So look at that and how you can make a transition from work to life, even if that's during the drive home, if it's, some ritual you do when you get home, but making that transition to actually detach from work. Now with COVID-19, there aren't always options in every laboratory environment, but in the day of this pandemic, some organizations have been open to having different work models. So, if you can, talk to your management team about different options that you can consider for your work area. There are some positions in our particular laboratory environment that employees have work that can be done from home. And so we've allowed some different work models of people working 50% in the laboratory and 50% at home, telecommuting and things like that. Flexible hours, compressed work weeks, some job sharing. So if there are options for your work schedule that will allow you some more flexibility, definitely look into those options. And then most commonly, taking care of yourself. So, during the pandemic, many people fell off of a fitness routine or a healthy living routine, but a healthy lifestyle is essential to helping you cope with stress and achieving that work-life balance that you might be seeking. So, as much as possible, trying to eat well, trying to keep physical activity as a part of your day. That can be hard. Exercise can be difficult if you've got a jam-packed schedule and you've got kids and all of these things. For me, I work out at 5 a.m. in the morning. I'm not a morning person. It took me a long time to get used to that routine of waking up, before 5 o'clock in the morning to get to the gym. But what I found was when I got into that routine, I actually started to feel like I actually had an advantage over many people in my day. By the time most people are just getting up, I've been up for 2 hours, and you feel like you at least got in some physical activity. You start to feel better about yourself. I will say in 2018, I struggled a lot with work-life balance. I started to feel like all I did was go to work and come home and take care of my family and then turn around and go right back to work. And so that's when I initially started getting into a fitness routine. And in the beginning, it was very difficult because I hadn't been physical or worked out in many, many years. But after I got into a routine, I, started to develop friends at the gym. We started to do different activities outside of the gym, like Spartan races. And it really sparked an interest in a new hobby that I didn't know would even exist for me. And it actually gave me more energy to do the other things in my life. So you can incorporate those things into your day, and it also will help you have something outside of the mundane work and home schedule. Where possible, relax. Just take some time for you. Just take some time to recharge and relax. Volunteer. Sometimes volunteering and connecting with others in your community can lead to better life satisfaction, lower stress, because it gives you a different perspective of other people in your community that might be dealing with other challenges or other issues that you don't have. And it tends to put the things that you're going through in perspective when you do volunteer. And then finally, just to wrap up these tips, develop a support system, and a support system of action-oriented people who are going through what you're going through, and you guys can join forces and give each other solutions. Like I said, we don't want to sit around and vent and gossip. Although that feels good, it's not the best use of your time. We want to talk to people who are going to offer us solutions and help us feel like we can take, these tips and things that we're talking about as a group and continue to combat our day and be victorious with our time. Finally, I would say don't assume that you need to make any of these changes all at once. You be realistic with the goals, especially, if you're struggling and dealing with a lot of things you're overwhelmed with. Try to start small. Just try to maybe leave early from work one day out of the week. So we've talked about this before in other podcast episodes that successful people keep goals in mind, short-term and long-term goals. And so don't think you've got to make all these changes at once. Start small, and remember that creating balance between how you work and what you think and how you spend your time is essential for the long-term health of both your career and in your personal life. Like I said, these are just a couple of tactics, but as you listen to this, if you've got other ways that you've learned to de-stress, if you've learned to unplug and you've learned to have a healthy balance between your personal and professional life, be sure to comment, email us, let us know what you've done, let us know what you're thinking. I don't know, is there anything you guys do, you ladies do that I didn't mention?
Yeah. Go ahead, Lona.
I loved what you said about that scheduling, because I think that's actually one of the biggest things that will really help, because one of the reasons, like I said, when things start bleeding, projects start bleeding into one another, it gets really overwhelming. So using your calendar is going to be really important to actually schedule your personal time, schedule your exercise, schedule the time that you're going to do like work project, and that's it. Schedule time that your family time, which should be a it depends on what your priorities are. You're going to prioritize and schedule those things in your calendar and try to stick to it. Of course, with time, it will take some time to get used to it. Like Stephanie was saying, like it's usually like one step, smaller step, until you get to the big step. So you probably start with trying to keep your calendar, and segmenting these projects are going to be really important to reduce the mental stress that you have, because when you know that things are already down and in your calendar, you're not worrying about it. You're not worrying about these loose ends that are there. And another thing that's so vital, that we tend to separate professional life with our whole life, with our self-care, with our personal life. And, I've been pushing that a lot, that it's so important when you're focused on your self-care, that's going to help you professionally. So don't see that as a separate part of your life. Prioritizing exercise, self-care, meditation, and being present. So when you're segmenting projects into your calendar, it's so important to be present at that moment for that project. So because you know that it's already there. So being present through either focusing on your child at that moment or your family at that moment, or doing meditation, is going to be so important so your mind is not all over the place. So I think those are really great when it comes to segmenting your projects, putting them in your calendar, and prioritizing self-care.
Absolutely. I agree with those. And take a vacation. I understand everybody's not traveling right now, but when I say take a vacation, if you are traveling, awesome, great. If you're not traveling, still take a vacation from work. I was reading a study. I like to read and listen to different podcasts and different things like that. And so according to the U.S. Travel Association, 52% of employees reported having unused vacation days left over at the end of the year. And so I know vacation, PTO, personal days, however your organization designated, that is a perk and a benefit for you to have, but the majority of our employees that are working today are not taking advantage of this benefit. And so that would be the other thing that I would add is taking that time off. Even if you're not traveling anywhere, take a staycation. You have to have that time to unwind and unplug so that you can come back and be creative and be innovative and be able to catch up with any emerging trends. If you're always in the trenches, it's going to be hard to steer the course. So everything that you ladies said, I think, was very valid. I'm always adding additional tools to my toolbox from information that you said. So taking that time to schedule and put it on my calendar, because the reality is if it's not on the calendar, it's probably not going to happen. And so just taking that a day off here, a day off there. And then I read another quote by Hank Jackson, president and CEO of SHRM, Society for Human Resource Management. And he said that work-life balance will mean different things to different people, which is true, because after all, we all have different life commitments. What's important to you is important to you. So in our always-on world, balance is a very personal thing, and only you can decide the lifestyle that suits you best. And it made me think about, a lot of our listeners are laboratorians, and several are in management, several are new managers, and having to be supportive of their employees. So just think about it, that work-life balance and that burnout and stress looks different for everybody, and what's important to one could be very different from the other. I know for me, before I was married and had kids, it looked very different. Career looked very different than it does, being married with a toddler. Looks very different. But for those that are listening that are maybe in leadership roles or management roles, in addition to everything that Lona and Stephanie mentioned, here's some ways that you could think about supporting your employees during this time. One is, and we've talked about this before on other podcasts, is knowing what your employees are really striving for. So that means you got to get out of that office and get to know your employees, because, like I just said, everybody's work-life balance goals are different. Some people might feel they have all day and all night to do work, and other people might feel that they don't. And it shouldn't be a person is penalized because they have to shut off at 5 p.m. So being able to know what your employees are striving for, talking to them about their objectives, and then you can determine the best way, you as their manager, on how to be able to help them so that they are able to have a better work-life balance. You as the manager, too, have to set a good example. And so this is something that I have to make sure as a manager of people and a leader of people that I'm doing. It's similar to like a parent. Your kids do as they see you do, not as they see you say. So if you tell them like you got personal days and vacation and you should be using it, but yet you're not using yours. So you got to set a good example. You got to model that leadership. Your employees follow your lead. And if you are in there working 12 and 14 hours a day, they feel like that is the expectation for them to do the same. If you send emails out at 9 and 10 o'clock p.m., that you're setting that example that's the expectation. So as managers, we have to be supportive of our employees during this, work-life balance and transition, especially of where we are. And then let your employees know what their options are, because, again, if they don't know what their options are, they're going off of what you do. I see that you have your phone all the time. I see you have your work emails popping up. I see that you are always in these meetings. I see that you are not available. And so that, to me, that must be the standard if I was an employee. So let employees know what their options are so that they know, is it possible for me to change my work hours and do 10-hour shifts during this time so that my kids are at home? I'm not trying to get out of work or anything like that, but it would be helpful if I could, start at 6 instead of 8 so that I can be off by 4 or whatever the case may be. But I don't know if I don't know that that's an option. So is it an option for me to do 10 hours for the next 3 months? Is it an option for me to work from home 1 day a week? What are the options, especially as people undergo different challenges in their life? Kids being at home and virtual schooling. Now your employees are responsible for taking care of their aging parent. So that's something that they didn't have before, and now they do. So those are things that we should think about and be able to communicate with our team. And as always, leaders are lifetime learners. So staying at the forefront of what's important and staying ahead of that curve of emerging work-life balance trends. Work-life or work for today for employees might not be a good fit a year from now. So keep in mind some of the work-life balance, some initiatives to be able to offer fresh and in-demand benefits and work-life balance programs. I mean, up until the pandemic, half the people didn't even know about Zoom. Now everything is on Zoom. Retirement parties are on Zoom. Funeral services are on Zoom. And so just thinking about those ways, I know in my workplace, all of those gatherings, company gatherings, being able to have carry-ins, all of that stuff right now is non-existent. And as people, we want to be connected. We want to be connected with our colleagues. We want to be connected and be able to share with our colleagues about our families, about who we are, as they say, break bread together, eat together. And in our workplaces today, as we know it, it's not possible to have those. Like we just had a retirement party at work, and we couldn't even do a carry-in. Couldn't do a carry-in, and the lady had been there for 30 years. So, we could come in and kind of like, hey, it's been nice working with you. But, again, those are things that people are starting to miss. It's been a year in the pandemic. And so staying on the forefront of trends and ways to make things just as comfortable for people, even though our dynamics have changed. So those would be the only additional things that I would add to the discussion to help our listeners out there who may be managers. So having that things that you can do from an individual perspective as well as things that you can do from a management perspective. Did you all have anything else to close it out?
No, I think that's good. And I think, just like you said, being attentive to your employees, no matter what level you're on. I've had one senior leader that was so attentive to us, even though our roles of directors, and the way he communicated that attentiveness was just so respectful, because I was one of those people who would send emails, midnight, 10 p.m. on a Sunday. And one day he came to me and he said, if you're working at that time to get things done, I'm never going to tell you not to. He said, but I'm not answering your 10 o'clock at night email. He just told me flat out. He said, I'm going to answer it in the morning on Monday when I get back to work because I'm spending time with my family. And just communicating that his expectation is that if you are doing that, great, but it's not what he needs you to do to show that you're committed to your job. And I will say, finally, when you really struck a bell with me personally when you said the thing about vacation, because last year, probably because of the pandemic and everything that we were doing, our organization caps our PTO limit at 700 hours. And I got a notification that I was not going to accrue any more PTO at a certain pay period because I had capped out at the 700 hours. And it wasn't until that point that I realized, I have not taken a day off a whole year. And so I'm looking through my calendar, like Lona said, how can I schedule in some time off? Luckily, it was around the holidays. But I really did feel when I did take the time off, I felt the difference of, going to work every single day and being in that mode and being able to decompress. And I really did feel recharged after I took that time off. So you just got to stop and sometimes, pay attention to yourself. So we hope that this podcast has been meaningful and that you guys have taken a little bit from our experiences as we've all gone through this together.
Thank you, ladies. It was really an interesting conversation, and we could go on and on. But I think we're going to just end at this note. Just check in with yourself and schedule time for yourself, schedule time for things that are important with your job, your family, but make sure that you set these boundaries and take care of yourselves. And so we really enjoy having this time to share with you. So keep listening to eLABorate Topic Podcast, either at directimpactbroadcasting.com or your favorite podcast platform. Just email us at elaboratetopic.com and let us know any topics you'd want us to talk about, or if you want to be a guest on this show. Until we talk to you again, have a great day.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of eLABorate Topics, where your hosts discussed relevant strategies for laboratory professionals. Please subscribe to this podcast on your favorite podcast platform and listen to us on directimpactbroadcasting.com. Stay tuned for another episode with information you can use to excel in your laboratory career.